On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about building controls. What goes into controlling a whole building? What is a BMS? And what is it going to take for the AV industry to adopt building controls? All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 47. Second mouse gets the cheese.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Kramer, AV Beyond the Box.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, automation, and programming aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for listening and thanks for joining us today. We have an exciting show lined up for you today, and we're going to talk about a topic that was a buzzword a few years ago, and it has never gone away, but it's something that has come up a little bit more in discussions, and that's the idea of full building control and how it impacts the control and programming aspects of the AV industry. So more on that to come. But before we get to that, I want to introduce my guests today. And first, I'll start off by my partner at A State of Control. His name is Rich Fregosa, and he's also known as Uncle Richie. How are you, Rich?
I'm good. Mellow summer West Coast greetings. So it's a balmy 73 here. So I'm kind of digging the downtime.
Very nice. And second is someone I know for a bit, and he's been a past guest on AV Week. His name is Stephen Lamfier, and he's from Barco. How are you today, Steve? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for making me a part of it.
Excellent. And last but not least, he comes to us as a control professional, and he has a specialty in building controls. His name is Will Rowntree from Siska Hennessy Group. How are you today, Will?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So as I mentioned in the opening, integrated building control systems is not something new. It's something that's been around and it's outdated. It's been in existence long before AV control systems. And when I talk about those, I'm talking about everything from lighting and shades and HVAC to security and public displays and life safety and so forth. So that was something that was discussed a lot in years previous, and we were looking at the idea of how does that impact what we do, and I think it's come up a little bit more in conversation now because the AV that we've been dealing with maybe is a little less challenging and a little less complex, so we have to look at what we can do to enhance that and also maybe focus a little bit more on a full user experience. So Rich, I'll kick this off with you. When you're thinking about building controls and controlling a full building, is this something that's feasible and how is this becoming a part of what we do?
Well, I think what's interesting about it is that, it's the scale of building control is the thing that fascinates me the most. Again, I'm just outside of San Francisco, and we have 800,000 people in San Francisco, and San Francisco is small. And just recently, what's been happening is that there's no new land. You can't spread out, so the only way to go is up. New York has had this for a century at this point. But there are a lot of urban areas that what's happened is that originally when, you had some of these buildings, they were smaller, maybe you weren't as conscious of the energy requirements or the distribution of energy and conservation and all of these things. But when you're dealing with a 50-story skyscraper, a 40-story skyscraper, these massive buildings that consume huge amounts of energy, that's always been at the forefront of it. But the technology was so cost prohibitive to be able to accurately take care of it. You needed to find a way to generate huge savings to be able to implement BMS. In smaller buildings, it was, somebody would run around with a thermostat or running around turning on the lights, or, whoever was the last one out turned off the lights was always a joke, right? But what I've seen, and it's interesting, is that from the residential side, what's bubbled up is with smart thermostats and smart lights and IoT. It is something now that not only the building manager, the landlord, but now the tenants of these buildings are looking at ways and going, how can we be energy conscious? How can we track what we're using? How can we use it efficiently? And all of a sudden, this data and these metrics become available to a whole lot more people, and they're aware of it. So I think where it's really on an uptick is the fact that people are aware of it, and people are trying to be energy conscious, and it's coming not only from, again, like I said, from the landlord side down, saying, how can we cut down our $100,000 a month electric bill? But everybody who's maybe in a workspace saying, hey, we're not working efficiently. So that's exciting. I mean, again, we're seeing a very fast increase in just the past 5 years, really, than we had seen in probably the 25 years before that.
So, Steve, I'll jump over to you. Rich talks a lot about the ROI and the energy management and costs. Is that what's driving this, or is there more to it?
I think that's a big driver. I actually had a customer that I was speaking with recently who has about 200 conference rooms. And they said, if we could just better manage the lights, the single display that's in that room and the HVAC, we'd save about $1,000 per room per year. That's almost $250,000. So energy savings is definitely a big aspect of it. I think the other two drivers behind that are being more proactive, knowing what's happening with all those devices, being able to monitor them, know what issues may be arising, watch developing trends, be able to be proactive about how you're maintaining those buildings. And then for me, one of the big things, kind of the third leg of it, is transparent experiences. It's being able to take all this information that we have from all the different devices and then throw in data from Exchange and things like RSS weather feeds and the time of day, and then be able to predict where people are going to be congregating in the building, be able to do zone HVAC control, things like that. So we're actually creating better experiences instead of somebody running and responding because somebody says they're too hot. Now we're actually being proactive and making things comfortable and adjusting things ahead of time to anticipate that. And I think for me, that's a big piece of what smarter buildings are all about, are being able to respond to those type of events or respond to security related events. So we know that, certain campuses, when the CEO is on campus or one of the board members is on campus, that particular building that they're in goes on lockdown. So being able to look at RFID readers and then put a building automatically on lockdown because a certain person is present, or because we know that they will be present because of Exchange or some other data. I think those are all part of smarter buildings. So, in the experiences that we can create with better AV control integrated with that building control piece of it.
So, Will, enlighten us a little bit. I know that we probably oversimplify what goes into these things as far as building controls, and buildings can't exist without them these days. But what do we need to know to be able to bring them into our world of the AV control and how and the marriage of the two? What value can be provided?
So I agree with what Rich and Steve were saying, but from what I've seen in my experience, the single largest hurdle to getting more advanced technologies in building management systems, believe it or not, it's almost the result of psychology, because essentially what you have is facilities managers. At this point, most of the facilities managers are, older guys, real old school guys. And a lot of them, even nowadays, if they have a building that still operates with a pneumatic system, there's no central point of control. Everything is, completely standalone and operates entirely mechanically, pneumatically. These guys are even hesitant to go to even a DDC-based BMS, even without things like IoT or integration into lighting, power management, any of that kind of stuff. Even without those features, they're hesitant enough to go into, even a DDC-based BMS. And I think there are two reasons for this, essentially. The first is simply as, a lot of these guys get older, they just, they fear the technology before them because they don't understand it. And then the other reason is they're actually afraid of this technology because they feel like they're going to be replaced. There's a lot of talk nowadays about the automation of a lot of jobs. And, automation will take away some jobs, but the reality is, with regards to facilities management, it's going to be a long, long time before that's fully automated. You still need the human touch in there. And they need to be better educated. And I put the onus on the vendors and manufacturers to do this. They need to be educated that the systems are being installed. They're not to replace what they do. It's to augment and enhance what they can do. That's the whole purpose. It's just trying to make their job easier, trying to make them more efficient. That is the end goal. And then the building management industry, unfortunately, it basically, with regards to technology, it follows the idea of, the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese, okay? No BMS manufacturer wants to be the first one out there with complete automation, complete integration to everything, very ultra modern BMS, because it will be completely rejected by the people that you need to sell it to. The facilities managers will be completely uninterested in it. And all you'll end up with is a failure of a company that 20 years down the line will be given the title of they were ahead of their time. They will set the high watermark for what everyone else will aspire to, but they themselves will ultimately fail by being the first out of the gate. Because the industry itself, it's not a proactive industry when it comes to innovation, it's reactive. It's very much driven by what their customers are interested in, and they will innovate very, very little outside of that because they have a very hard time selling anything outside of that. But what we're seeing more and more now is pressure from the clients who actually, work with the facilities managers. I can think of, a company that I know, one of the largest BMS manufacturers in the country, in the world as well, actually. They did a residential building in New York City over the last couple of years. Very, very high-end condos. I think the average asking price of the condos was somewhere between $3 and $4 million. And once people started moving in, they asked very simply, almost all of the tenants, okay, how do I control the thermostat with my phone? And what the BMS manufacturer said was, we can't do that. We don't have the technology to do that. Our hardware simply is not capable of it. So that was a very large wake-up call. This became a problem that they had to address, because now you're interacting with more than just the facilities managers. You're interacting with people who, having worked with iPhones and Android phones for years and years now, they expect the latest, greatest technology. So it's going to be a battle between the facilities managers who want something as mechanical and rudimentary as possible, and the people who actually occupy the buildings who want something state-of-the-art. So slowly, as the older facilities managers get to retirement age and newer, younger facilities managers are brought in, it's going to cause a paradigm shift in the building management world where it's going to be more and more technology driven. I mean, realistically, with HVAC systems, the mechanical, the electrical side of it, there hasn't been any innovation in there in decades. That's just very, very fundamental stuff. Where the innovation will take place is on the controls side. So as we're seeing more and more of this, building management systems, building automation itself will change. And what we're going to start to see is much more convergence in building management systems, AV systems, lighting systems, power systems. It's going to eventually all come together because that is what everyone will want.
So it sounds to me like it's kind of that age old challenge that it's user driven, but but the adoption has to be there in order for that connection to be made. And
Absolutely, yeah. It's an awkward position to be in.
so following up on that, what do you think aside from a different way of thinking, where do you see the challenges existing in bringing this down to a level where it can be part of what we do?
So what I have seen from a lot of BMS manufacturers the last few years is they won't completely open up their code, which is totally understandable, but they're at least starting to use open APIs now. So what they're giving, the clients, the customers at this point is choice. You can use hardware from one manufacturer, and then you can use a graphics package from a third party if you want very particular graphics, for example. And it's also going to allow third-party hardware people to also integrate into the building management systems. They're opening their architecture up, not fully. They're going to retain their IP, obviously, but they're opening it up enough to stay competitive because they're all starting to do it. That's the direction the industry is headed in. So once everyone moves towards open architecture, you're going to see a lot more compatibility between the large-scale BMS manufacturers and then the smaller industries that just have, some equipment here and there. AV would be one of them for sure.
So, Steve, I'll jump over to you because Will mentioned open APIs and being able to be more compatible. I know that this is a world that you live in and a world that we live in. Is the industry that we are working in something that is ready to dive into a challenge like this? Are we and how do you see, I know you talked about the user experience. What's it going to take for us to really capitalize here?
Yeah, so I think users expecting better outcomes is definitely a big driver here, as Will was talking about. So definitely has to happen. But then you do have all these different technologies, and you have things on Simplex and BackNet and everything else. And so the ability for something to sit in the middle of that and talk to all those different technologies via their native standard protocols, I think is really important, but also endeavors like Haystack that's trying to take and create a standard for how all these different devices should report back their data and their status and use common naming conventions. I think those are part of it as well. So, so absolutely, there's opportunity there for us to go in and to do that. My philosophy, and the philosophy of Barco that I work for has been very much let's get away from a lot of customization and move towards more standardized, more harmonized drivers, the Haystack thing that I just mentioned, but also move more towards architecture that really is a friendlier, so that people aren't intimidated. So we'll talk a lot about the technology fear factor that exists. And I think a lot of that is because everything has been custom programmed with custom UIs, and then that gets in the hand of a facilities manager, and maybe something's a little bit different than it was programmed 6 months ago because there was a different programmer by the person that provided that programming. So creating these really consistent experiences, things that are almost template based, I think is going to help eliminate a lot of that and move away from things being very, very custom, so that when there needs to be a change, you can be very agile about making that change instead of having to go back to somebody and incurring a lot of expensive changes, and instead just being able to go, oh, I actually know what this change needs to be. I can do that myself. So make things really make the tools very friendly, very intuitive, and invite the managers of those facilities and others that are actually going to be touching the hardware and interacting with those devices, make it very inviting for them and not intimidating. So, and even in simple AV control rooms, I've been, an AV manager publishes a PowerPoint. Here's how to manage the hardware in this space, and it's almost crazy that there's like a 30-page PowerPoint to show somebody how to turn on the power on a display and get audio to the lectern. It's crazy. And so that, I think, automation comes with that a lot, which is kind of what we touched on at the beginning is, let's automate these experiences based on all that information available so that people don't have that intimidation factor.
So it sounds to me like the idea or the direction that building controls are going in could be a positive influence on what we do in terms of, keeping things less custom, but and more open and more familiar, I guess, or consistent from system to system.
Yeah, I think consistency and automation. Just let's take the human factor out of it where we can. Let's anticipate things and build automated experiences around it so that when you do have to go in and make a change, it's easy for you because of the consistency, but hopefully you don't have to do that. Hopefully things are automated enough that the building is smart enough to respond to you.
So Rich, we talked a little bit about energy management. We talked a little bit about, the fact that there's a real need here. How come we're not seeing more of this happening? And what is it? Is it a selling issue? Is it a technology issue? Is it just a mindset issue? What do you think?
I think it's twofold. I think one is that the concept is great, but the actual time that's required and the cost that has to be paid to somebody is not necessarily palatable. When we talk about savings, it's great. You could save X, Y, Z, over the course of a year, and you're going to amortize it. And, again, I would say, Stephen brought up a great point. It's like, 200 conference rooms, $1,000 a year, $200,000 savings. Great. So the first thing they think is, wow, we just saved $200,000. Didn't occur that there's actually going to be a cost to get to that point. So all of a sudden, when you say you will save X, in order to get there, it is going to take Y in time and cost and development and hardware and software and all of these things. And then all of a sudden people kind of go, well, maybe it's just okay how it is, which that is a common conversation that occurs. So that is a huge hurdle to overcome. And that's with automation in general. That's with anything that we do in part of this industry is when we're facilitating and streamlining. And, it all comes down to, where those threshold points are and where the value add is. And depending on where you are with the decision maker on this is really going to leverage how much you can push out. In residential, it's a little bit easier. It's a smaller scale. We have different tools. There's different factors to deal with it. And there's a big difference between a 3,500 square foot house and a 45,000 square foot house. And we will have BMS systems in those places. And there is, light harvesting and protecting artwork and, everything that we were talking about before, based upon, whether you see precipitation coming, whether, you're dealing with your sunrise and your sunset. I mean, all of these things that occur that benefit somebody's lifestyle. People working in an office, and again, people aren't as attached to their office, and they're not necessarily as tuned into the cost it takes to run their office, because it's not necessarily an out-of-pocket expense. They're not going to be necessarily as vocal about it. They'll appreciate it. They think it's cool. But when you're dealing with the actual sell-through, yes, it does require a much more considered effort. And the issue right now is that we have the BMS systems manufacturers. We have those contractors, those developers. They're one camp. We have the other side with the integrators and the software developers on our side. And we're not all necessarily speaking as a unified front. We're getting better, where we're starting to speak with one another. We're talking about common APIs. We're seeing these things start to happen, but there is not necessarily industry-wide in terms of communication between industries. There's personal relationships, there's professional relationships, but there are not industry relationships that are driving this forward that says, automation manufacturer XYZ will work with BMS manufacturer XYZ. This is how we do it. Here's the 4 case studies. This is how we've shown it. And this is how we have been able to effectively keep the costs down by this. That's a tough one. So what's happening is it's on the front lines. You have, you have companies who are doing it in order to promote themselves as the value add proposition, but industry-wide, we're just not seeing it yet. And that one, I scratch my head on that one.
Yeah, it really kind of, everything that you're saying sort of reminds me of what Will said at the outset. That's, we have to have those common APIs, move away from things that are so proprietary that it becomes, de rigueur, it becomes required that you actually have somebody there to do the customization at every single level. And that's where the expense comes. But those open APIs, common APIs, help us move away from things that are very, very proprietary to things that are very open, so that creating things that don't have a lot of expense associated with it becomes more realistic. Because right now, if everything's proprietary and you have to get certified on every one of those proprietary platforms and then take weeks to figure out how to integrate them, it just doesn't make sense. And that's where that's why it is so expensive to do all that programming. So moving away from those things to things that are really common, as you mentioned, well, I think it has to happen. I think it's going to help the industry develop much more quickly as people move towards that, more standards-based approach.
Oh yeah, to echo what Steve and Rich were saying, I was working on a project a few years ago where early on in construction, the building management system had the boiler plant system going. And an important part of a boiler plant system is to know the outside air temperature. And the problem is they didn't have the weather station installed yet, so they weren't directly reading the outside air temperature. And it wasn't going to be installed for quite some time because even the roof structure was still being put together, still being erected. It wasn't completely finished yet. So they needed this information, didn't yet have a way to do it. And what they ended up doing is purchasing a piece of software that fundamentally is very simple, goes out to the internet, grabs the outside temperature from, presumably weather.com, and just plants it into the BMS. And that's how they were using the system for a while. And for that simple piece of software, they paid $9,000. And I thought to myself at the time, first off, damn, I wish I'd known they were working on that. I could have made the same thing in the same hour for $8,000. But secondly, they really need to get, the industry as a whole needs to get their act together. Like, it shouldn't require such a ridiculous specific piece of software to get the outside air temperature. Anyone can look up an outside air temperature on their phone in a matter of seconds. But to get it in a BMS, it costs thousands and thousands of dollars, literally thousands. And I couldn't believe that when that happened. So like Steve was saying before, one of the movements that's going on now is Project Haystack, which is an overall approach towards unifying point names and, more importantly, metadata tagging and point descriptions. Because I've seen systems where if you work on, a building management system was installed in an estate where there was 5 different buildings. And if you do it quickly, you have 5 different programmers, 5 different engineers working on those buildings. And what you end up at the end of it is 5 different sets of naming standards and descriptions, because there is no unified standard. So if you incorporate something like Project Haystack, which has been incorporated in Tritium for a while now, and is being incorporated into BACnet, what you'll end up with is you don't necessarily need the exact same name for point names. You don't necessarily need the exact same name for point descriptions, because the metadata tagging, all the information behind the scenes is uniform. And so when you aggregate all that data, you put it all together, the servers, the head end, is going to be able to understand what points are alike and what points are different. Also, when we standardize these types of things, like Steve was saying, it's not just going to make it more friendly for people, just trying to connect to the industry, people just putting their 2 cents in, trying to get their technology to work in conjunction with the BMS. Even for established professionals, it's just going to allow them to work more efficiently. You don't have to work up a naming scheme, a description scheme. It's already done for you. So even professionals will be able to accomplish their work more quickly and more efficiently because of these types of standards. So as these standards start to roll out and become more and more incorporated, overall, it's just going to make things better for everybody inside BMS and then everyone outside BMS who's trying to link into the BMS world.
I love it. Imagine if the cell phone industry had done that. In the US, we have all these different cell phone standards, but in Europe, they don't. If the AV industry had done that, and even in the AV industry, people sometimes feel trapped by their control solution. But if that standard that you're just talking about right now, I think will be a huge differentiator for, as the people buy into it, the technology has got a nice foundation to work from. So
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, guys, I think that's a good ending point for today, but I appreciate the lively conversation. And I think that this is going to provide a good basis for future show topics and future conversations in the industry. I certainly learned a few things, and I think that our audience will as well. So with that, I'd like to thank our guests for being here today. First, I'd like to thank Stephen Lamphere from Barco. Steve, how can people get in touch with you, learn more about Barco, and learn more about Overture and the things that you're doing?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Stephen Lamphere on LinkedIn with Barco, or you can email me. My last name is Lamphear, first name Stephen with a V at barco.com.
Thank you. Very good. Will Rowntree, thanks for being with us today. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about Syska Hennessy and the things that you do?
Sure. Thank you for having me on. You can visit our website, syska.com. You can email me personally, WROANTREE@syska.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Very good. Thank you. And last but not least, Rich Fregosa, thanks for another great show. Rich, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, obviously you can find us here. You can find us on AVNation, either here or on a Resi Week. You can also find me at fregosadesign.com, or probably the best way is the Twitters at rfregosa, RFREGOSA. And otherwise, type my name into the Googles and something will pop up. It always does. But yeah, great information. I definitely love this one.
Very good. Thank you. So my name's Steve Greenblatt. You can follow me on social media as simply at Steve Greenblatt, or visit my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. And please take some time to go visit the AVNation website. There's a whole bunch of great shows, including the ITAV show, Connected, a couple of others that I think would be very pertinent to this audience, and the flagship shows of AV Week and Resi Week. So check those out. And I'm also a big fan of the AV profession. While you're at the website, visit the underwriters. They want to hear from you, and they help us to do what we do. So thanks for being with us. Please leave a comment, leave a message. Let us know you're out there. Leave a review, and we'd love to hear from our audience and know what you want to hear more about, and possibly even if there's some good guests out there that want to join us. So look forward to that. And until next time, this has been A State of Control.